panelists can actually see your lovely faces and we can have a discussion. And I'm just looking at the gallery now to see if Alex is here. I don't see him yet, but I'm sure he'll be joining us shortly. So please turn on your camera. And I think it is just a little past 3:30. So why don't we get started with some introductions? My name is Mary Ellen Schroeder. I am the Director of Career Development, and I work with Meg. Meg, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Meg Gatterman, the Student Outreach Manager here, and also 2010 Illustration Alumni.
Thank you. So to those of you who are not enrolled in financial literacy and careers, welcome. This is a class that we've been teaching in the liberal arts department since 2016. And the financial literacy part of the course is about, personal finance, taxes, your relationship with money, budgeting. And the career part is really about exploration and the idea that your working life can have many multiple iterations. In the class right now, the students have imagined one iteration of a possible life that they can see for themselves and they're curious about, and they're currently engaged in meeting people who are in some way connected to what they can see for themselves in the future. And the idea is that you're going to start meeting people who can give you more insight into what that choice might look like, and you can get a little glimpse of your future self. Today, we're going to hear from three MassArt alums. Alex Nally, who I believe will be joining us shortly. He received his BFA from SIM in 2016, and he works as a legal designer and practitioner who co-designs policies that center dignity and human experiences within legal systems. And he currently serves as legislative director and deputy general counsel in the Massachusetts State Senate. Mel Tiang, who received her BFA in film video in 2016 and is a community artist and educator based in Boston. She specializes in creative portraiture and exhibition documentation. And Mel taught life art and money in the SIM department last year and enjoyed it very much. And she is also the vice chair of MassArt's Alumni Leadership Council. And finally, we have Shanti Merdayanti. Did I say that correctly? And she received her BFA in animation in 2019. She works as an illustrator and animator in New York City and works with the Richard Lewis Media Group as a motion designer. And Shanti is actually a former student in financial literacy and careers. She took the course in the fall of 2017. So she was in the same place all of you were in, back when she was a student as well. So why don't we just kind of get started with, bring us back to what major were you considering when you came to MassArt? And why don't we start with you, Mel?
Well, I just want to say hello, everybody. It's really nice to see your beautiful faces. And if you have your cameras off, your beautiful names. Okay, yes. So when I first applied for MassArt, I knew MassArt was going to be my school pretty early on, because when I was in middle school, I was at the Worcester Art Museum taking classes. And one of my teachers had told me, like, hey, have you heard of MassArt? And I was like, what's that? And then I was just meeting more and more people in my high school career that had gone to MassArt or were intending to go there. So it felt like the right school for me. Since I was 13, I've always known that photography would be the language that I would speak forever. It's just absolutely clicked with me and pun intended, captured my soul. And when I went to MassArt, I toured the photo department and I was like, this is it. Photo is it. I'm going to go here. I'm going to use these printers. I'm going to use the darkroom. And then in my foundation year, I took an intro to film class. And I fell in love with that. And I was like, okay, actually, maybe I'm going to do film video instead. Still camera oriented, but it's just taking 24 pictures a second instead of just one one at a time. And that was a really interesting choice to not go for the photo major, because I still became a professional photographer after graduating. But I'm still very glad for the skill set that I gained in film video and the people that I met, especially. Yeah.
Great. And Mel, can you tell us more about your current profession and what you're doing?
Yes. Sorry, there's a plane. I'm outside. I wanted to be outside. I've just been holed up inside, so I'm outside with y'all today. Um, yeah, so for my current profession, I am a full-time freelance photographer, and I specialize in doing creative portraiture, and I also document exhibitions at arts museums like the ICA, MIT List, if you've been out at De Cordova. I do a lot of artwork documentation for individual artists as well, so helping to capture, glass sculptures and paintings, and a lot of people whose work I actually know from being at MassArt. And then beyond that, I also teach. So I taught Art Life Money last year at MassArt. It was awesome. And I also do a lot of community engagement in Chinatown as well.
Great, thank you. And Shanti, why can I ask the same question of you? What was your major when you first came to MassArt? And can you tell us more about your current position?
Of course. So, hello everyone. I'm Shanti. It's so nice to meet all of you. When I first went to MassArt, I only had experience with digital illustration, and I started illustrating like with Photoshop, Explore. I had my first graphic tablet when I was like 11 years old, so I'd never done anything but illustration until like throughout my studio foundation year of MassArt as well. And I just randomly decided it would be a fun challenge to try animation instead of illustration as well, because I thought to myself, that way I can learn two things. And I did know that I wanted to work in the animation industry to some capacity. I just didn't know what. I didn't know if I wanted to be an illustrator for animators or if I wanted to be an animator myself. And there are just so many different roles specifically in the animation industry in general. I felt like I wanted to keep it versatile. And that was always my motto, like try to be a generalist until I find something I'm really passionate about. So that's how I ended up in animation, which I am now working full time. Um, I work at Richard Lewis Media Group, and so I work remotely from New York, but I only moved here like a year and a half ago. So we're based in Watertown. What we do is we specialize in immersive and interactive experiences for public spaces. So that's usually museums. Sometimes it's universities. Sometimes it'll be like cultural landmarks. We've even talked about getting into the live music industry. It's a very versatile company as well. The way that we operate, pretty much every in-house artist has an official title. Mine is motion designer, but we all operate as generalists. We have producers who are nature photographers on the side, graphic designers who like to animate animals for fun. Like it's a very creative company. But the good thing about it is a lot of the legwork of finding projects, finding clients is basically done for you by the company. So it gives a lot of us the opportunity to have a regular 9 to 5 job, usually some overtime, but we'll probably get into that. But the beautiful thing about it is you just get a whole roster of really big clients just from being an in-house artist. So that's probably the best part about it.
Great, thank you. So I should also mention that I want this to be a conversation. So if you have any questions, please unmute yourself as we're going through this conversation. And really this is about our alums kind of sharing their different career paths and why they chose them, the decisions that they made along the way. I'm going to put Mel and Shanti's full bio that we had on the event description in the chat so that you can see a little more about them. But my next question, because I don't think Alex is quite here yet, but when he arrives, we'll kind of bring him into the conversation. A lot of careers, and tell me whether you found this is true or not, is this ability to kind of adapt and pivot your skill sets to get where you want to go. And how did your art school experience prepare you for where you are right now? And either one of you can Jump right.
Um, I know for myself, again, going into animation, I didn't really have any expectations of what that was going to be or what I even wanted out of that. So I think that mindset probably informed my very generalist approach that I have now. But I think what was unique about MassArt, we were being taught by independent artists, freelance artists. So we were really getting the indie perspective on things. When we would go to film festivals, we were getting the experimental side of things. You know, there's a whole other side of animation that is maybe more corporate or more formulaic, like if you look at feature films. Um, and it was a world I would have never known about if it wasn't for MassArt. And I also didn't expect to love it as much as I did. Thought I was going to go in a very different direction. So staying open, I mean, it sounds generic, but it's like all you can really do because things are always changing and you are always changing. And even as a working professional, every day I'm changing my mind. Um, and the less expectations you set, the better, I think.
Thank you.
Oh my God, Shanti, that's beautiful. Can I also hop in and answer the question?
please.
Okay. I love the staying open. I know it's like cheesy, and I feel like I can imagine. I mean, I remember when I was at MassArt and there would be guest lectures and they would say things like, stay open, be open-minded. And I'd be like, that's cheesy. But then it's also so true. And I think that's why we all say it. I don't think it's cheesy also. Because I'm here for the cheese. Yeah, I think one thing I love about MassArt is that it's a state school. And that means that we are not funded in the same exact way as perhaps like Emerson. Like I'm thinking about Emerson a lot because as a film video major, I noticed my friends that went to Emerson were a lot better resourced, to be honest, right? The equipment, maybe, the sort of the sound stages that they had access to and things like that. And I think one of the things that, because MassArt's a state school and because it's resourced the way that it is, it also taught me to be scrappy as hell, to be really resourceful and to figure out like, how can I make something look like it's big budget with like not a big budget? And I think that's a kind of a perennial skill that has really brought me to a lot of really good work when I graduated, because when you graduate, you have even less resources because equipment cage goes away, or like, I don't know. I remember when my Adobe subscription for the student discount ended, and it made me realize that I already had skill sets to, use a cheaper light set to make something look absolutely like I did it in an incredible studio. So that's, I think, one of the ways that my MassArt experience has always helped me.
Great. Thank you so much. And I just saw in the chat that Alex was able to join us, got delayed, I think, in a meeting. So we were just talking about the need to kind of pivot and adapt your skill set now that you're out in the world and working in different ways. But Alex, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself. And we started off with just Shanti and Mel were describing when they first came to MassArt, what majors they were thinking about, and if they were, new discoveries that they learned at MassArt in terms of majors. And that kind of segued into their current profession. So if you could share that would be really great.
Yeah, definitely. And I apologize for being late, and also the Wi-Fi in the State House, which is like 200 years old, as you can imagine, is not great. So I'm joining like through data right now. So if I get choppy, like just let me know. I'll turn my video off or something. But it's great to meet you all. My name's Alex now. I use he, him pronouns. I'm currently the legislative director and deputy general counsel for State Senator Julian Sear, where I primarily get to work on LGBTQ policy every day. When I was a MassArt student, I was very involved in student government. I spent 2 terms as student trustee, worked on the name and gender pronoun policy, and then my senior year, I was SGA president. And initially, when I went to MassArt, I thought I would major in graphic design or photography because that's what I was familiar with in terms of creative tools or skill sets. And those are things that I'm very much still passionate about and very much still make time for in my life. But when I was at MassArt, I was also involved with the Fenway Health Youth Community Advisory Board and advocating for LGBTQ patients in the community, because at the time I was participating in what was called like a PrEP trial, which is this thing called pre-exposure prophylaxis, which is an HIV medication you can take that prevents you from contracting HIV. And so that, like, I was doing that because I was a poor MassArt student, and I was like, cool, I can get $2,000 to be part of this study that will also prevent me from getting HIV. This is great. And then it was like through there that I met some folks who were engaged in LGBTQ community advocacy at the state level. And so all of that happened really like during my first year at MassArt. And I realized that I wanted to find a way to merge my creative skills with policy advocacy, to make Massachusetts a better place for LGBTQ people. So basically, instead of doing graphic design or photography, I just went to sim because I just like needed like a black box that I could like just go in there, use it as an incubator to like find a way to merge my policy interests with my creative interests. And I worked on designing a couple of like legal free help apps while I was still at MassArt. So I used like graphic design to develop free legal resources. And then I went to law school. And so now I'm mostly doing policy work, but I work for a state senator. So someone's gotta photograph him, make him look good too. And I work on really complex legislation. So being able to sort of boil down big laws into small ideas and like creative, like fun communications and graphically designed one pagers makes my work more accessible to other people. So I'm still very much using my MassArt skills every day, even though I work in the state house and our Wi-Fi is hot garbage.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. I love that connection between what happened to you as a student, and it really influenced what you were planning, what you ended up doing after you graduated. Um, so I have a question, networking. I am sure since all of you have graduated, you've been out in the workforce, it's one of the concepts that we work with in the class is the idea of the power of networking and the people that you meet. Is there any advice or thoughts that you can share about your own networking experience?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts coming from, I think usually when we talk about networking, I feel like networking conflicts with a lot of introverted personalities sometimes, which I would put myself in. So I feel like I've always been trying to crack the code of how to network, how to get myself out there, in the least nerve-wracking way possible. And honestly, I always go back to my 4 years at MassArt as the best time I ever set a foundation for myself that I feel like I can still benefit from to this day. And in one of the biggest ways I think that I did that was probably one of the most unexpected ways, but it was just developing a good relationship with my professors, and not necessarily in any type of crazy way. Like, it was really just doing my work and doing it well and talking to them about why I was doing it, where I felt like they were able to really understand me and why I did what I did and able to give me a little bit more personalized guidance. And I think in seeing how dedicated I was to my own portfolio, but also returning the respect of their time. These are, again, at least in animation, these are a lot of freelance artists that are, I think giving a lot more than they get for the knowledge that they bring you in those courses. I think like seeing the things that they teach you be reciprocated in the work that you do. I feel like to this day, I still feel a lot of those professors' appreciation. And, this job that I got at RLMG, I got it through one of my first animation professors who I didn't even think would remember me. But I really liked his course and I really liked his teaching style. And I ended up doing an entire candy theme for all of my work for no reason. I just decided all of my projects would be candy themed. And then at our senior thesis show, he showed up to my table to let me know about this job because he remembered all the candy themed stuff that I did. And the work that he was doing at the time actually coincidentally aligned in a lot of ways with what I was doing back then. So I feel like it is a combination of chance and coincidence, but it's also, I think, just really valuing and appreciating every opportunity to network that you have in front of you. I think that being at a college, university in general, is such a privilege, especially with the arts. It's not easy, I think, to replicate that outside of the college environment. So while you have it, just keep all of your relationships positive and strong, and remember people, and know that there is a high chance that they'll remember you too.
What great advice. And Val, I saw you shaking, you're nodding your head.
Well, I just love hearing that story. I love hearing that like your work spoke for itself and people remembered that and then came back to you. I think that's like a really beautiful part of that. I think I agree with the networking thing kind of being like a little bit sticky. Also for like if you have introverted energy, and also networking feels very like sometimes to me like buttoned up and like very like, oh, I need to like network. I need to like work the crowd. And I was just thinking about like networking kind of comes in different modes, and there's the networking that you can have when you are trying to foster a mentor, trying to find a mentor. Like I am a big fan of the cold email. When I see someone who's just absolutely badass and is just doing a ton of really cool stuff, like I will just slide into the DMs and be like, hi, I'm Nell and I'm an artist and what you do is really cool. Like, do you have time to like go get a boba in Chinatown, or do you have time to just like hop on a Zoom and so I can just ask you about like how did you get to where you got to? And then there's also like peer networking, which is like a lot more natural and a lot more casual, which could just be like, hey, like I was always known as like the photo babe. If people like wanted stuff documented while I was a student at MassArt, they'd be like, oh, I know to hit Mel up because she, and like you get to find those people, or like I knew who would always be the person to connect with when I was really struggling with like grading my film. And I think it's like it can be kind of resourcing like that, and then obviously then there's also networking when you're fostering other connections and being a mentor yourself. But I also think that with networking, it doesn't have to be as like it doesn't have to be like a clinical force. I think kind of following your natural inclinations of the friendships that you want to form and the spaces that you want to be in and the people that really resonate with you. Because I've also had complete fails of informational interviews where I've gone and been really vulnerable and been like, hey, I really want to know more about you, and had them, speak down to me, or have them really not give a lot of information or and things like that. So I say that just to say that like following your intuition of who you want to naturally be connected with, who you'd really want to be in community with, I think that makes that kind of makes it a more natural thing. Because at this point, I don't do any advertising for my business. I'm all based on referrals, and it's all based on of the relationships that I've made over time. And it feels like very natural when I take on new clients, because it's just kind of in a lot of it's done in community and in friendship.
Great. Alex, any thoughts about networking from you?
Yeah, and like at the risk of like maybe saying some things that are like questionable, especially for a recorded class, like I guess I would just say like the networking is a term and an important framework to think about things. Like Marianne's really setting you all up for success by like having this conversation with you all at this point in your journey, but like it's really just about like connection and like working those like muscles of like being able to talk about yourself and your work with other people. And then like eventually you can kind of like level up to finding a way to like influence other people around you to like set up the conditions you need for your work or your career to thrive. And so like I went about that in a very non-traditional, somewhat unintentional way. Just, you know, by getting to know lots of other young LGBTQ people in Boston. You know, like I think there was like this joke, and there was this event in Sim every year. I don't know if it still happens or not. It was called Omnibirth, where we just like celebrated everyone's birthday on the same day, but it was basically just like this huge party. So it's this very unprofessional, like sort of like informal environment, but it happened every year. And during that event, much like during working on Big Show, or like really for everyone at MassArt who gets involved with the All Schools show, it's like these sort of like cornerstone events or things that happen every year where there's just this huge mix of people, like provides the opportunity for you to have sort of like spontaneous connection with someone you might not otherwise have been able to, or like made the time to. And so that's another really important form of networking. And the only way to really build up the skills to be able to like rise to the occasion in those moments is to like try to commit to like having those like cold outreaches and informational interviews, to just like develop those muscles of like, this is what it feels like to talk about myself and my work, or like this is the kind of impression I want to leave with someone, so that like they think about me either like when they're looking for like other photographers, or they're just thinking about like other like supportive artists and community members. But there's no like one size fits all way to do it. But definitely dating around can like kind of like help with that, and just like becoming friends with people, like just meeting lots of different people can be really helpful, because it's all data. And I think it's really important to be able to effectively communicate with people that are less like you, and also to like be mindful that like even if someone you're talking to feels like someone that you might never run into again, it's very possible that somehow some way you will definitely run into that person again at some point in your life. Like the number of like full circle moments I've had lately, just like of these most unpredictable connections, has really shown me that like there truly is no like meet someone once and never see them again kind of interaction. Um, so to the extent that you can make a good or genuine impression with someone, you know, of any kind, I think is really helpful, because that person could end up being someone that you just casually mention to someday, like, hey, like I'm just looking for an internship, like I got some time and I have some skills I'm trying to work on, like do you think that's something that like I might be able to do with you? And like then they say yes, and then you know you do that, and then all of a sudden you work there for 5 years, and then you're like an assistant general counsel of that agency, which is what happened to me. Or in the case of my current job, like I met Senator Sear 10 years ago, when I was just like doing policy work with my friends and like advocates, and now it's like this whole other thing. So yeah,
Alex.
all that to say, it happens professionally and unprofessionally. So
Well, those casual connections are so important, Alex, and I'm so glad you brought them up, because the all school show, those opportunities on campus, is a way to develop relationships and connections to people. And I tell new graduates all the time and alumni, your best, and students, your best allies are your classmates. You're going to know them after you graduate as well. And people who have a different skill set can come and be very helpful to you in your journey, and you can be helpful to them. The way I kind of describe networking, and you can all make a comment about this, but if any of you have ever traveled to another country or even another city in the US, it's very common for you to ask somebody, can you recommend a restaurant? What would be interesting to see here that other people wouldn't, know about? You're asking questions. It's about wayfinding, and that's what you're doing in these informational interviews, is that you're finding your way. You're just asking for additional information. One of the questions that came up in the chat, which I think Shanti had mentioned, was, do you have any tips for keeping in touch with your professors after graduation? And if any of you could comment on the idea of being introverted, shy, you don't really feel comfortable talking to other people. Any tips, practical tips you can offer?
I can definitely say that for myself, bringing up my own work is the hardest thing for me to do, and is probably the biggest reason why networking has always been really scary to me. But the easiest way to get around that is just showing my support for other artists, especially if I know that we are within 1, 2, 3 degrees of separation. I think everybody wants to be seen, everyone wants to be appreciated. And if you're an artist yourself, it's not hard to appreciate other artists. And I feel like I have a lot of corny things to say. But I do feel like showing love to other artists has always come back to me. Not that that is ever really the incentive, it's just kind of the truth. And I feel the same way, I think especially with my work at RLMG, we'll have a lot of holes in our projects that we'll need to fill last minute. So let's say, we need to make a cartoon and we've got 1 month left and we realize we need this background of a mountain. In those moments, and like moments of high tension, I will just think back to some of my most recent interactions and be like, who do I feel like will be immediately available, but also I've spoken to soon enough where like I will be able to get an answer back from them. So I really think it's staying in touch, if that's starting an art Instagram and interacting with your peers or showing up to every flyer that you see. For me, that's always been the most helpful. And then in terms of staying in touch with professors, honestly, again, I am not great at that either necessarily, but I think those times where I was with my professors, whether that was in a classroom environment or in an event, kind of what Alex was saying, when you show your work ethic once, sometimes that's enough. And that's also gone the other way for me. There are times where I have overbooked myself and probably taken on a project I shouldn't have, and not only lost that connection, but lost a stream of connections from that, and the other way around. So yeah, that's kind of how it works in my world.
Thank you. Mel, were you gonna mention?
Yes, I want to hop in. Yes. I think for tips for staying in touch with professors, it's I think, okay, so I'm trying to reframe in my brain. I think the ratio of alumni to like alumni who become faculty is like inordinately high at MassArt in particular. And I think that means like a very special thing. And it took me a second to realize that all of my professors have like full working lives outside of the classroom. A lot of the professors that we have also have their own artist practices, their own businesses, their own full things that they're up to. And one of my professors who I've remained close with is Evelyn Ridds. And when I graduated, I actually became her I was like in foundation year with her in visual language, and then I became her TA for visual language in my senior year. And then afterwards, she had a ton of really interesting projects, and she asked me to be a part of them, to help her out sometimes with like some small admin. I helped like run a website for one of her projects, and then eventually I became a photographer for her work. And it was just something that was like very organically. Thank you for digging inordinately. But yeah, it's just something that was really organic. But I will also note it's about the kind of chemistry that you have with your professors as well, because there were some professors that, you know, it just we didn't vibe. Like, I love the course, or I learned, but I also, the people that I've stayed in touch with are the people whose, you know, um whose energy and then whose like career I wanted to stay in touch with. I really agree with Shanti that giving love to other artists and being able to go to other people's exhibitions, being able to support other people when they share their work online, that's been a huge thing as well, with and can really help you with staying in touch with your professors. Is like, you know, I can just think about Loretta right now. Loretta has her work inside the MassArt Art Museum. If you know Loretta Park, who does a lot of work at MassArt, I think is teaching in the foundation year as well. So it just I think that's a really great pathway. It's just supporting their work is a great way to stay in touch with them.
Alex, anything you want to add about that? Staying in touch with faculty members, advice for people who are feeling kind of shy, introverted?
Yeah, um I think part of it kind of starts with like whatever your academic practice is, which for me, especially in my liberal arts classes, was um a lot of like note taking, and bookmarking, like literally books that just had quotes in them that were significant to me at the time. Because I think it's always interesting to revisit that stuff. Like I don't do it on a regular schedule, but just sort of like every time I move or I'm like organizing stuff or whatever, like I come across like a paper I wrote. And I always find reflecting on what was significant to me at the time and circling back to it, is one really interesting prompt for like re-engaging with faculty. And so um, I recently contributed a chapter to a legal design textbook that's going to be coming out soon about centering human dignity and like the human experience in policy making. And I had taken a really awesome class about like positive psychology with Gunta Kaza. And so when I started work on that chapter, I'd like looked through my notes from that class and I reached out to Gunta to see how she was doing. And like we just did a Zoom together, and it was just amazing because there was something about like being able to connect it to the work I was doing at the time, like made it so easy for me to recreate the same kind of like genuine and incredible like transfer of wisdom experience that I had always had with her as a student of hers, even all these years later after MassArt. So I think that's one thing. The other thing I'd say is like following people on Instagram is not nothing, especially if you have a prior relationship. Like there's just something about like being able to have like a familiarity and a visual sense with the work that people are engaging in, like that makes it so much easier to pick up a conversation with them like if you see them again. Because and you never know, like that's the thing, is like you never know like when it's all going to come full circle again. So like for example, I had a meeting the other day with the CEO of the Mount Auburn Cemetery. And for those who might not be familiar, like the Mount Auburn Cemetery recently had like one of the most beautiful nighttime like full scale light projection installation series that was produced by Masari Studios, which has a bunch of sim alums, including this guy Sam that I overlapped with. And so it was just this incredible moment of like, oh my gosh, like I I love everything that the cemetery is doing because I know that you support MassArt alumni, and like my friends are like showcasing their work on your grounds and like it's having this huge impact on the community. So there's nothing wrong with just following your friends on Instagram and sliding into their DMs and telling them like, hey, this is really cool. We should catch up. sometime soon.
So we're definitely seeing a connection to sharing the love about the art that everyone's creating. It's an easy way to connect with people. And obviously what you learned at MassArt and kind of bringing that back into focus and an easy way to kind of connect with former faculty. So thank you for that. Erica, did you want to ask your question?
Sure. Hi, my name is Erica. I just really typed it in the chat, but I was asking, when you were a student, what is one value, belief, or trait you gained while you were a student that you still carry and apply at your profession to this day?
I love that question.
Erica, I'm obsessed with this question. It's a really good one. It's a very good question. Yeah, I want to jump in. I have a negative belief that I developed as a student, that I still carry today, and I want to talk about that. I have always had this feeling of like, can I swear in this soon? All right, okay, I'm gonna not. No, I'm not going to. I'm so sorry. It's I always have this message, this internal message of like, Mel, get your stuff together. You got to get it together. Look at all these people out here. Like, look at who, like, they just posted on their Instagram. They got this incredible opportunity. Like, oh my God, like they're doing a group exhibition together. Or like, oh no, like maybe I should be developing this like side zine to like show that I'm like a really, interesting artist too. And like all of these kind of comparison beliefs that, yeah, imposter syndrome. And I think that one of the ways that I'm trying to kind of deprogram that messaging of not enough or that sort of scarcity mindset is remembering that this journey is a cumulative one, that there's no I am more secure and more stable and more fulfilled than I have ever been, and I still have more to go, still have more to learn. But that doesn't mean I can't stop and kind of rest in where I'm at in the journey right now. That like right now as a student, y'all don't have to be professional artists with perfect portfolios and a perfect resume and like be like super on the grind and on the hustle and like what's your next step. I think that I've always put that sort of pressure on myself, and sometimes it can be helpful as a motivator, but also it can be very draining and something that's very demoralizing. And it's definitely something I still deal with right now. I know it's a negative one, but it's a very deep truth. One of the ways that I've been able to kind of remove that or kind of lessen that, the strength of that negative belief, is through talking with other artists that are in similar situations as I am. If I'm like in a tax moment, and I will just call my best friend who's also a freelance artist and be like, hey, you doing your taxes too? What are we doing right now? This is so hard. But there are many, many different ways to kind of tap in and kind of reveal the truth that you don't have to have it all together. Every single step of the way, I've figured it out. Like when I had to learn how to do my taxes, I just figured it out, learned how to do my taxes. When I had to figure out how to really price my work or build my first contract, all of that were just giant question marks that freaked me out. But eventually I kind of, through help, through finding resources, can kind of have managed it. And now it's all working. It's all working now. It's not perfect, but it's working. And I'm working on lowering that belief.
Wonderful. And what an honest and authentic response. That's great. So I love that question. The belief, trait, or value that you had as a student that maybe you still have now, good or bad. Do either of our other speakers have any comments?
Yeah, I can say that for myself, I knew that I was getting myself into a lot of work, but you don't know what that feels like until you're actually doing it. And then you also have professors telling you like, just wait, like it's going to be just as hard, if not harder after school. And coping with that mentally was really difficult because I don't know about the rest of you, but being financially independent in college for the first time helped me actually really understand the value of money and free time. And I went into all of this thinking, I'm going to be career oriented. I don't care how many hours of overtime I'm working. I'm chasing my dreams. To by the end of college being like, my dream is a balanced life. My dream is not just art. My dream is being able to rest, being able to spend time with my friends. And I don't want my whole life to be about art. There are a lot of other things that I care about. And to this day, I think I'm still trying to figure out the balance of that. And I don't think I have it figured out. But one thing I will say is the thing that helps me the most, again, is the community I surround myself in. Working with other artists who share the same values of work balance culture usually just helps the most in being able to collaborate on a project together. Learning how to set boundaries, even in my full-time job, it's a really difficult thing and something I wish I had started thinking about earlier before saying yes to every little thing, thinking it would eventually bring me to that place where I could take a break. Yeah, I think being in college basically taught me that happiness and physical health will always come before like educational and career success. And you can't have those things without looking out for yourself, So I feel like I'm full of corniness today, but
Not corniness. I think it's actually really important advice. And I love that you're talking about the balance and how important it is to strike the right balance for yourself. And I see you nodding your head again, Mel. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, not really, honestly, not really. I think Shanti just said it. Like, there is so much. We can't make the work that we make unless we are living our lives. Like, I have to remind myself that I don't like live to work. I work so that I can live. And that's like a really beautiful reminder that you've shared with me today, Shanti. Thank you.
Yes, wonderful. And Alex, jump in. Any thoughts about, kind of that work-life balance and the importance?
Yeah, I think it's something that can like change. Like it's certainly something that is not always going to be straightforward or necessarily like stay the same. And so I think to the extent that you're able to reflect on like the experiences you're having right now where you're making good work and it feels amazing while you're making that work, like thinking about what those common elements are across those experiences, and then also thinking about um like growing pains and what those feel like and what those experiences feel like, and like kind of like how where those have occurred on your journey as well as they relate to those other moments where it feels like you're more at cruising altitude, because life is going to be a balance of many of both of those kinds of like chapters or like mini vignettes in your life. And I think it's just important to keep that in mind, that it's never going to be like about the one next thing or the one thing or the one vision that you have right now that you're striving to work towards, because eventually like you're going to surpass that, and then it'll be the question of like, well, what about the next thing? Or like maybe it might not even be so much about milestones so much as like how you're doing your work, and whether you're doing your work like in a more isolated way or in community. And so I mentioned that in the context of work-life balance because like I recently changed jobs, and my current job is very different from where I was working before in a state agency. Now I report directly to a state senator, so like my life can kind of be all over the place depending on what's going on. But it's that kind of tension right now that motivates me, because I have a lot of access to being able to work on policy that like helps my community. And like one thing that I took away from MassArt was just always believing in myself and remembering that like the chances are like you are like the only person in the room that's had like your mix of life experiences and has met the varied kinds of people that you've met, and that is inherently valuable. You are inherently valuable, but like you need the right tension in your life in order to grow too. So like in my last job, I had been there for a while and I'd gotten comfortable. And I just realized that I was just like kind of like starting to like decay a little bit because I had kind of like learned all of the things. It felt like I'd learned all the things that there were to learn there. And so even though my current job is certainly more demanding, I'm also growing a lot. And the community that I have right now is really enabling me to be successful. And it feels more similar to the experiences I had at MassArt that felt like I was thriving. And so being able to like figure out what works and what feels good during your time at MassArt and like reflecting on that, I think is important because it'll help you later on in later chapters in your life when it might feel like things could be out of balance. And then you can just kind of like work towards like getting back to a place where like you have the right mix of like work motivation, but also community to support you and like the energy you need to be able to do all of that stuff.
Those are really important points, Alex, that idea of community and finding your connections. And it's making me curious about you, Shanti. I don't know if you're originally from New York City, but you're living in Brooklyn now and you're working primarily remotely, right? So how did you find connections? How do you find that community when you're not working in a workplace 5 days a week?
Yeah, kind of as we've been saying, it's really been through friendship. I think everything I do for myself with my work, in order for me to feel connected to my work, I feel like I do need to understand why I'm making it and who I'm making it for. And I feel like I tend to be picky in that way, and picky in a way that doesn't necessarily benefit me too much because I tend to gravitate towards supporting family and supporting friends and supporting maybe smaller initiatives because it's for me, it's just easier to grasp why I'm working and why I'm doing what I do. Also why I like working at RLMG because it feels like there's a purpose. For me, purpose is really important with my work. Doesn't always translate to money, honestly. But it does translate to happiness in a different way. A lot of my connections have just been made through living with other artists. When I moved to New York, I actually moved here because the majority of my community moved here. I basically stayed in Boston until no one was left of my community. And then I came here and followed everyone again. It is hard to start from scratch. It's hard to start when you're all alone. I think roommates and offering myself up to people's parents, honestly, who need a little bit of help with their, I have a friend who has like a convenience store. My partner his family hosts cultural events. My boss's cousin hosts movie nights. Just doing things out of nothing but just a willingness to help has been what has built my community.
Wow. And being open to the idea of, did you say it was your boss's cousin who has movie nights?
Yeah, it was a coincidence. I went to a movie night. I'm trying to remember. My boss was going to this movie night that was in my neighborhood, so I went there too, and I didn't realize her cousin was running it, and I ended up talking to the person running it and made their logo, which ended up also, again, creating all these connections in between my work and that. Like, it's always really random. And again, it's kind of like what Alex was saying, like you just don't know. Things come full circle. I mean, right now I'm in New York and I'm meeting people from 10, 20 years ago, and there should be no reason that we're meeting, but we are. But the impressions you leave on people last. And then I think the last thing I'll say is really some of the best connections I make, I'm not thinking about work at all. It's usually really just someone that I share the same values with, and it leads us down the same path.
That's awesome. That's great. And please raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question of our alums. Any, questions that you have about, graduating and life after MassArt and what they did to overcome what you perceive potentially as an obstacle for you. That would be helpful, I'm sure, for everybody who's here today. Let me ask you a question. What do you know now that you wish you would known when you were a student?
Work for exposure. They always say don't do it, but seriously don't do it. Like seriously, you need to see money up front. you need to have things written down. Sometimes when you're collaborating with people, you need to sign off on things that probably sound like common sense. You know, I've definitely participated in a lot of creative projects or roped together a group of creatives to work on. For example, I was presented with an opportunity. In one case, it was to work on a documentary that was eventually going to go to Netflix. And I had a very limited time and budget for work to do myself. So I roped in a group of 5 other people to join me. And I was very naive about it. We didn't put anything in writing. And I kind of just went off the trust of who they were as people. And what it ended up coming down to is me shouldering a lot of the responsibility for some communication or work issues that came along. And then also, I think some interpersonal relationships, like suffering from that. And yeah, I would say just put things in writing. If you're talking numbers, put those numbers in writing and see some of those numbers before you start working. You know, no amount of like free effort or being taken advantage of is ever going to be worth growing in your career. Again, I'm just look out for yourself before anyone else.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? What you know now that you wish you had known as a student? Shanti shared, get it in writing, which is great advice.
I think one thing I wish I knew then was that really the number of letters that come after the end of your name really don't matter. I think I thought that because I had gone to art school and because I was an artist that I needed to go to law school and grad school and become an attorney to have some level of like objective or professional validation behind my ideas, like in the policy space and when advocating for the queer community. And I think those things were certainly helpful, but not entirely necessary either. So all that to say, like, you all have validity and power in your lived experiences and in the work that you're doing at MassArt. So if you have any doubts to that at the end of your time at MassArt, like rushing into grad school and jumping into grad school debt is not necessarily the only way to validate yourself.
I love that. Everybody has a valid life direction and knowledge that they can offer to other people and experience. I love that. Anything you want to add, Mel?
There's like 1,000 things rushing through my mind with this question. I think, yeah, I mean, I'm gonna come in with my cheese and my corniness too, but I think one thing I wish that I knew as a student that I know now that I work with you know, a lot of really successful contemporary artists and curators and people that have all the letters after their names and and I wish that I knew that all of those people are also just completely making it up and like completely just figuring it out. And it's like, it's chaos out here post grad. It's organized chaos, and that everyone's just kind of listening to their internal compass of what feels right for them. And that's how people build their lives. So I think like that's kind of what I wish I knew as a student that I know now. So now when I walk into rooms and I know I'm making it up a little bit, like, oh, I have my little system that I do here for when I do this type of photography. I used to get really worried about, oh, does this look professional enough? Like, I look young, like, do they know that I really know what I'm doing? Like, I would ask those questions, but now I kind of can slide into spaces and be like, oh no, like everyone here is absolutely making it up, me included, and it's going to be fine.
I love that. I love that. And it's so true. And developing that inner compass, I think, is so critical to people's success. Thank you for that. All right. Well, we're coming up on, it's just, I think, a little past 4:30. Are there any final questions that people would like to ask of our panelists? And just throw them in the chat, or unmute yourself, raise your hand, whatever feels comfortable for you. And any final thoughts while people are kind of thinking of questions? Advice, things that people should be prepared for when they graduate. Any thoughts on that?
One little thought that might, I don't know if it's like a little rebellious or not, but one thing that I would always think to myself in college, when I was in animation, is like we would be getting a lot of assignments that I'm sure like you've all had this experience where you look at an assignment and you're like, I'm about to spend 2-3 weeks working on this, and it's not even going to be something I want to put in my portfolio. Like, this is ridiculous. In certain situations, or in a lot of situations, I would choose to ignore the prompt, and not entirely, but just enough to replace it with a really high quality of work, in my opinion, that would be able to get me a job. So maybe you upset your teacher a little, but I think that if your work is, good for good reason, you can get away with it, and you will thank yourself after college, because putting together a portfolio is a whole, in my opinion, it's a whole full-time job. It's been so hard for me to do that while working a job over all these years. I'm like, I'm not done. I'm not done. I'm not done. And my work from MassArt is still some of my most resolved personal work, because I had that mindset, because I was like, well, I'm going to make this to get the job that I want, not to, make my teacher happy. And, sometimes it kind of sucks in the moment, but in the long run, if you know what you want and if you know what you don't want, because I knew what I didn't want. For example, I didn't want to be a 3D artist. So whenever it came to 3D projects, I was like, how can I also kind of make this a 2D project? Because that's what I actually want to do. It's kind of like when I was working on my portfolio, I would be getting advice from people that would always sound a little bit like, if you don't want to do infographics, why are you putting all your infographics on your website? And I'd be like, well, it's all I have, but it's not what I want to do. So you're better off taking it off. So, I think sometimes in art school, when you have so much work, you're trying to pick your battles. And if you get to that point, just pick yourself, pick what you're passionate about, pick what you naturally gravitate towards, pick what makes you feel good, what you enjoy making, because that is going to be your career.
Love it. Love it. And
I just want to second everything that Shanti just said. Like, that was a huge part of why I left graphic design. Like, in a panic, 2 weeks after the ad drop deadline, I just like completely screwed myself and like spring semester sophomore year. But it all worked out because like I just like found the right space and the right support, and then most importantly, the path of least resistance to making the work that I most wanted to make. And here we are today. Oh yeah, definitely the ad drop period. Like, she was always like a wheeling and dealing policy girly. Like, just like, I don't know her, the ad drop deadline, it just doesn't apply to me. But like, I just got to get out of graphic design like now. And I don't know, it all worked out.
excellent. Mel, any final thoughts that you want to share?
I just like third everything Shanti had said. I second everything Alex had just said. Yeah, I think another kind of like random one. This popped up for a lot of the seniors that I had last semester. But just stay on top of your credits. Be the steward of your credits, and understand what the requirements are for you while you're going through your curriculum, so that you can graduate when you want to and when it makes sense for you. So it's just one of those things, like, we are working in an automated computer system, and that's like kind of lame technical advice, but I do feel like being a steward of your curriculum, like going to the right office and asking, like, what do I need to do to graduate? Just don't forget to stay in touch with that information, because it can bite you in the butt later if you are like, hey, I'm getting ready to graduate, and you're like, oh no, I didn't fulfill this requirement, or I don't have X many credits. So that's just like random advice that comes to mind.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. And speaking of staying in touch, One of the suggestions that I always make to students in the class is if you have guest speakers and they've said something that you think is great and you want to follow up and you're just curious to learn more, would the students be able to contact you if they wanted to have an informational interview? Great. So if you're willing to have a student do any outreach to you and add you to their network, could you just pop your email in the chat? That would be great. And thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. It's always fun to have the alums come back. And thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just got to learn so much from Shanti and Alex myself. That's like what MassArt alums do. Like we can just all continue to help each other and support each other. It's awesome.
Hey, Mel, can you talk more about the alumni connections after graduation, since you're the vice chair of the alumni
Oh
leadership?
yes, let me do my job. Thank you, Mary Ellen. So I'm part of something called the Alumni Leadership Council. I'm the vice chair. It's a cohort of about 21 MassArt alumni from graduating years from 1971 all the way to today, from all different programs, all different majors, and it's a really wonderful group. Essentially, our goal as volunteers is to connect alumni to each other, alumni back to the school, and alumni to current students. And, you know, one of the projects that we have been working on for the past few years is something called the BIPOC Fund, which was a student-led initiative. But essentially, we raise funds for BIPOC seniors to fund their senior thesis projects. And that is just something that you can apply for. And if you identify as a BIPOC student, you can just get those funds. But also, I will say, like, connecting with alumni relations and connecting with MassArt after you graduate, you know, give it some time. If you need some time after you graduate and you're like, give me a second, like I was just here for 4 years, I totally get that. I did the same thing. But it can be something that's incredibly enriching to like really dive deep with alumni that you might not actually naturally get to connect with, whether they're in a different graduating year or they live in a different part of the country. But connecting with alumni relations and the council itself is a really great way to like grow personally and grow professionally as well.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. Well, I think we've reached the end of our time together. I want to say thank you again. And thank you to everyone who joined us for the presentation.
Thank you so much. It was really great to meet everyone.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you guys.